Carrying on with Pullmans, the latest Hornby one is outstanding. The earlier one, not the original Triumph one, which was hideous, represented the 1928 cars, which are more appropriate to the Eastern Region main line. And this was the one they produced. Well, they only produced two types, the Parlour First and the Parlour Brake Third. The finish is very good. It's not in the same league, though, in terms of finish as their later one. And Bachmann have just introduced the Mark I Pullman car, a splendid model, although how you'll reconcile the differences in the interpretation of the livery, I'm not quite sure. I don't know which is the more right, probably somewhere between the two. But it's a bit disappointing because problem is Mark I's never had Mark I brakes, and they ran with the 1928 or earlier slab-sided cars in the Pullman sets. Well, that's a problem for the future, and we'll just have to see what we can do. But the main problem with this, and they are worth carrying on with, I assure you, because as I say, the 1928 cars, of which this is one, all steel cars, no trussing. These were the most common ones on the Eastern Region, particularly after 1960, when the Metropolitan Camel Mark I Pullman cars came in and the 28 brakes ran behind them or at either end of the trains. But look at this bogie. Pullmans were for the rich, and they expected a decent ride, and the bigger the bogie, the heavier the bogie, you get a better ride. And this is horrible. It's about 8'9" bogie wheelbase, which is no bogie, I know. And it's just shocking. Fortunately, there are firms that do proper bogies. One of them is Keen Systems of Telford, and this is their plastic bogie, 10-foot bogie. Someone at Hornby must, in their wisdom, when they designed these cars about 15 years ago, have known that there was a 10-foot bogie to go underneath them. Because if you look at the well, it's a 10-foot well. Great. But look at the pivot. It's an 8'6" or 8'9" pivot towards the end. I don't know why they did this. I really don't have the faintest idea. So how do we get rid of it? You are told in the instructions to remove this. And we start by cutting this away. There's something quite satisfying about this. It's destructive. Try not to let the saw go too far and damage the sole bar. That's just about there. You can finish off with a file. A little bit left there, but you'll find it will pick away. You're also required to move the pivot to the centre of the 10-foot. This doesn't have to be too accurate, as long as you don't do damage. Don't go too far, you don't want to take out the whole of the panel. It's sort of like a keyhole in a way. You end up making a dreadful mess. Clean up any rough edges. This really is a very, very good way of improving these cars. And although they're no longer in production, they've been superseded by Hornby's latest ones, they're very, very easily obtainable on the second-hand market. In fact, you can probably get them new still at various retail outlets. And they are more appropriate for the Eastern Region main line than Hornby's current ones. Just make sure that that's flush. Then we have these pieces which give us the new positioning for the centre pivot. So make sure you've got the plastic weld and flood the joint with plastic weld. It is very, very important though that you left nothing standing up. No detritus, detritus, however you pronounce it, because that is your new bearing pivot. So it is very, very important. Capillary action will draw that in. It acts as a solvent, so what you're doing is the very, very best form of joint is in fact a weld. It may have put a bit too much on there, but never mind. Next thing you do is get the pivot, which is that. Clean it up, and then that just slots in. It's worth doing at this point. There we are. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit messy in appearance, as long as it's all fitted in. There's one that was done earlier, the other end. And that's the replacement bogey, as I pointed out to you. And that will fit there. How do we make the bogey? Quite simple, really. Clean off the side frame. They ping away. And on a clean, flat surface, you put these together. Again with a plastic weld. Just check that. Set that aside to dry. Plastic weld really does need a little bit of time to dry. Certainly when I built this, I certainly don't recommend that we run it straight away on its bogies. Bogey side frames. Now you're given these sort of plastic, these are okay in a way. They're designed to take pinpoint axles, but my experience is if you have a plastic bogey and a steel pinpoint, it's the bogey that's going to wear. So I'm going to fit Peco bearing washers. They're not pinpoints, but they'll run quite well, but you need to open them out to accommodate those. Now, I don't have the faintest idea what size this bit is. It just lives in the same tray that the bearings live in, so I know. And you don't really need a drill. You just sort of finger pressure will open it out. Now, the Cleverdicks will use a micrometer, and they'll be able to tell you exactly the outside diameter of that. I've seen a micrometer. I don't quite know. It looks mathematical, so that stumped me. If you're really stuck and you're not quite sure which bit to drill, which bit to use, just drill some pilot holes in a scrap bit of wood until you find the one that the Peco bearings fit into. If it's the perfect fit, you won't get it out again, but you only lose one. And then that then just presses in. These will fight you, they'll ping away. If you need 8, best buy a dozen, because they will just disappear. It should be ever so slightly proud. So what we're going to do now is introduce, again, some slightly runny super glue. Not the runniest, the slightly viscous. Don't need too much. And sort of introduce that from the side, down the channel. Just let it run in. You'll find capillary action will draw it round. Press that in, end of a file. The super glue will slightly soften the plastic. This one I put in earlier, but what you need to do is just take off the face of the bearing. And by doing that, you'll have put just a tiny bit of burr on the inside. So just work that round with the end of an old knife. Blow out. We can get on to the next stage, which is to put these together. The fit should be fine. If necessary, just file a bit. That doesn't seem to be too far out. No, that's okay. And if the fit is perfect, you find that friction will hold it into position. Again, once you've finished with super glue, it's pretty nasty stuff. Get rid of it as far away as possible. Don't start anywhere near any other chemicals. I don't know what kind of devil's brew could occur. Now, previous experience has told me with these that when you start fitting the wheels in, the axle lengths can be just a tiny bit tight. So what I'm going to do is effect a cure, or effect a prevention rather than a cure. I'm using Market's wheels, the best rolling stock wheels for 00 in my opinion. Now Mark Arscott will go mental at me actually doing this, but I'm taking the pinpoints down, just filing them down slightly. These are a standard modern, that's non-wooden centered steel wheel. Mark I coaches, Stanier coaches, Pullman cars, Gresley coaches. But I'm just taking that down, the actual tip off just a bit. And then what we do is just test that. That's fine, that fit. And that's fine, that fit. Now, best practice would make sure that this was thoroughly dry before you start putting the other side on, but since I never do anything properly, we'll see if we can get away with it. So that's got to be... When kits were designed, whoever designed them, they were designed for three-handed people, because that seems to be the only way that you can fit them together. But with a little bit of luck and perseverance, just check that that works. They should be nice and free. It's a little bit tight on that one, but you can ease them. Now rest the whole assembly on something flat. This is pretty flat, my melamine top. And press down not too heavily, but that will then make sure that the bogie is square. And add the capillary action, will draw it in. You notice I'm coming from the top with this because I'm assembling it the right way round, as it were, but capillary action will draw that in. They're nice and free. There's no rock on that. There are a couple of bits you've got to fit. If you note on this bogie, the bolster, I suppose, the spring, and the axle box covers, but you just stick those on in much the same way. Axle box covers. There. The bolsters, you just cut those out and stick them behind. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by showing you how to do that. And then we put this in, which is the pivot. Now I'm going to leave that at least 24 hours to dry, and it will dry on a flat piece. But what I'll show you here is you're given a little clip. This device, I've never liked these. I'm not having a go at Roger Keane. I think his products are great. But that's supposed to go through the floor and hold the bogie on. So it's held in place by friction. So if you need to take it out, they run the risk of damage. So I much prefer, these are 6BA bolts. So what I'm going to do, we finish with the plastic weld now, is hold this in place with super glue. I don't know whether this will be the best in terms of bond, but what might be an idea, once the super glue is set, is put some epoxy filler or something. Don't worry about the hole in the floor, by the way. That will be covered over by the seating. Make sure it's the one that I've made already. And then that fits on there. The ride height is lower, the whole thing is better, it's more accurate, much, much better. Well done, Roger Keane. For this Hornby conversion, the whole pack, they do a whole range to suit them, extra tanks, vestibules, everything.